The Bible views history as the story of God's relationship with humans and his progressive actions to repair or re-establish life-giving order to the chaos that has become the world, right? Our world is a very beautiful and sadly a tragic place. The desire to do good things does not always result in good things happening. There is a constant pull away from order and into chaos. The Bible summarizes 4 major events in history that has happened in the world that culminate in the world that we have received. So the first you've probably heard of, when Adam and Eve ate an apple. Well, actually, if you go back to Genesis chapter 3, it doesn't call it an apple. It's a fruit from a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Basically, the holy people that God created first to represent human beings and to act as priests for God on this new earth that he'd created, which he created for them. They were the focus of this creation, right? So they desired to rule it autonomously from God. And in order to do that, they needed to be judges, which is a thing in the Bible. So when they take the fruit and they eat it, their eyes are opened to what is good and what is evil. Now, evil there isn't only moral evil, it includes the idea of what's productive and what's not productive. So their desire for autonomy led them to corrupt themselves by eating the fruit. And in corrupting themselves, that spread out to the whole earth and to all of the offspring that they may have. So all human beings find themselves in the isolated position away from God because the representatives of human beings chose autonomy from God. It's like, if I was to give an analogy, if someone betrayed their government and they were put into exile away from their country. If they had kids, their kids would be born in exile, the other country. And so in the similar way, Adam and Eve were exiled from God's presence so that all other human beings are born outside of God's presence. That was, you probably think, oh, you're leaving out a character. Yeah, that's right. I'm leaving out the character of the snake or the serpent or the shining one, or if you read the literature, the original rebel. He was the one that deceived them and led them out. So that's the first event. It's not the only one. The second event was in Genesis chapter 6, where the creatures that God had created in the unseen realm, we call them angels. They're actually known as Elohim. It says in chapter 6 that they saw the women, the human women, and thought that they were attractive. So they came out of the unseen, came down, had sexual interaction with these women, and bore they're called giants, but think of something about maybe maximum 9 feet tall, but giants. And they became, it says, the mighty men, the men of renown, the men of name. So when you think of other religions in the ancient Near East, this is where that idea comes from. So these beings, the creatures came out of the unseen and influenced humankind away from God to rebel against God. And their offspring became the kings or the warrior kings of different communities and countries or groups of people. It was because of that that God sent the flood of Noah to wipe out that problem. Because basically everybody was thinking of violence all the time, it says in the Bible. This rebellion out of heaven from these unseen creatures, these creatures from the unseen world that God had made, following the original rebel, came out to try and do damage. There's a little known third event that people don't realize is such a big deal, and that's the Tower of Babel. God wanted humans to have him as their God. God wanted to be a father to them, to go and to teach them how they should live and show them the trees and the things that he made, and have that joy that most fathers or mothers or caregivers of children enjoy doing with little kids. The snake came into the garden and stole that opportunity away. And then this third event, which is when human beings joined together to build a big ziggurat, a tower, so that they could call these false gods from the unseen world. So rather than going after God who made them and loves them as a father and wants to teach them and guide them, human beings go after God's rivals, God's enemies, the people that have separated themselves away from God to directly fight against him and influence his kids against him, the kids being human beings. So you can understand the deep grief of God. And when we're reading the Bible and when we're looking at the history that the Bible presents to us, it is framed in that grief, that tension that God has of being so angry at rebellion and sin, but yet loves people and his creation so much that he seeks reconciliation. There's that tension constantly in the Old Testament. The ultimate event in history that the Bible records and that all Christians everywhere will recognize as the most significant and important event in history is the crucifixion, death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus.
Jesus is the Son of God. And that seems like a big deal in the New Testament. But we've got all these other sons of God in the Old Testament who are spiritual beings. Like, how can that be? How does that work? Well, if we go to John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. Let me turn on my pane view again. His only Son. Now, right here, we have the Greek word behind the one I clicked on is monogenes. Monogenes. There was a time in biblical studies where monogenes was thought to originate from two Greek terms. Monos, which means one or only, and then genao, which is a verb that means to beget. And that's where we got the translation only begotten. Now, in the late 19th, early to mid 20th centuries, there was more Greek material from the Koine stage of the Greek language, which is the language of the New Testament, Koine Greek, that established the fact that that's really not what's going on with monogenes. Instead of monogenes being formed from monos and genao, it's really formed from monos and the noun gene. Monos means one or only. Gene means kind or type. A type of a thing, a kind of thing. What the term really means is one of a kind, unique. Okay. For God so loved the world that he gave his unique Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. You say, well, big deal, Mike. Now, if we did a search, and I'm going to do a search here on the lemma monogenes, and just do a quick search of my Bible. Let's make this a little bigger. I'm not going to go through all of these because they're all consistent with what I'm going to say, but there's a key one down here in Hebrews 11:17, pardon me. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, who had received the promises. And he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only, there's the word, his monogenes son. Question. Was Isaac Abraham's only son? No. He'd already had a boy, Ishmael. In fact, Isaac wasn't even the firstborn, at least, of all Abraham's sons. He's the firstborn of Sarah. But why would Isaac be called monogenes? Why would Isaac be unique? It's because he was the son of Sarah by supernatural act of God, and he was the inheritor of the covenant. None of Abraham's other sons could say that. Okay, what's the point? The point is that the term means unique, and we can see that in this parallel. This is why Isaac is specifically isolated, and it doesn't mean the only one that exists. Okay, like the people who want to say that Psalm 82 is just, Elohim or people, okay? None of the other gods exist. No, Jesus is called the monogenes for a very specific reason. What makes Jesus unique among all other sons of God? He's Yahweh. He has, again, the unique set of attributes of Yahweh. He was the son who pre-existed his birth. Okay, that one is the one that God sent, again, to be an offering for sin. None of the other ones, that one.
Jesus, the God-man who came down to earth, came to address those and to fix those three problems. Man's autonomous rebellion against God led to human beings' exile from the presence of God. Jesus came to fix that problem, to reconcile human beings back to God. Jesus came down to attack and to destroy the spiritual power of the unseen realm that is rebelling against God, the unseen power that they had over people, over the nations, over the Gentiles, because the Tower of Babel led to God separating the world into nations. So when God came down, he assigned gods to the nations. And when he did that because that's what the human beings at Babel wanted. They didn't want God as their God. So God said, fine, you don't want me as your God? Fine, I'll split you up into nations and I'll assign to you a lesser Elohim as your God. And those Elohim got corrupted and started acting unjustly, and God was upset at that. And that's described in Psalm 82. And so when Jesus came, he came to free humans from the oppression of these rebellious Elohim that had been appointed as gods over human beings. And the third thing he came to do was to restore the separate world and everything that had been created by God, to restore and reconcile all those things back to himself. So what has happened is Jesus has given human beings a way to restore that relationship by putting their faith in themselves in the resurrection of Jesus. He has destroyed the power that other gods have over the nations. And thirdly, the recapitulation of the unity of what God created. That's still to come. So these are the three major things that Jesus' ministry in the Bible is described as addressing.